Today we reflect on war, murder, and divine justice with my grandfather, Charlie Ricketts, on Spirit and Spire starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit and Spire. And now, here is your host.
Welcome back to another episode of Spirit and Spire. I'm your host today, Vincent Ricketts, for the first time. And join with me, as always, as co-hosts, we have Mr. Eric Huff.
Hey, everybody.
And John Soul.
Good day, everyone.
We also have switching for us my lovely wife, Lucia, who is not mic'd up presently, so she'll just be the silent switcher. And, of course, our...
Hi, Lucia.
Hi, Lucia. Our special guest for the day is, well, let's see here. Cathedral parishioner, Louisville native, local attorney, former FBI agent, ham radio enthusiast, and my grandfather, Charlie Ricketts, affectionately known in the family as Papa Chuck. So if I will be calling you Papa Chuck today. So
make yourself comfortable. Everybody can use that name without any problem. I'll just work up the adoption papers after we finish here.
All right. So before we begin, just a little reminder to like this video, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. I think that's it. So
Comment.
Yes.
Comments are very important to us.
Yes, they really do help us out. All right. Papa Chuck.
Yes, sir.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, my grandson.
It's a pleasure to have you on. This was a little bit of a surprise interview, but so thank you for
more for me than for you.
So thank you for jumping on kind of last minute with us.
That's fine. I'm trained to do that.
So I guess let's just start at the beginning. So, where were you born? Where'd you grow up? What was that like?
Well, I can't really remember April the 4th, 1943, but I'm told that I was a blue baby. This occurred at St. Mary's and Elizabeth's Hospital, not the one with which you're familiar now, which is more in the south end. This was at 12th and the railroad tracks. And they also had a school of nursing there for Catholic girls who wanted to continue their educations past high school. I was much too young to flirt with them, but I'm told they were pretty good-looking ladies. That was on April the 4th of 43. Now, please understand, we were at war. And this was the year before Second World War, when we landed in France. Normandy. Operation Overlord. My mind became a little corroded with the rain we had last week. But in any event, because it was wartime and young Boy Scouts on the street were collecting old used tires for the rubber. They were picking up tin cans. Everyone saved their tin cans. Everyone saved anything that was usable or could be made usable. And high schools would raise money and have benefits. They'd sell newspapers where they'd go to everybody and find their newspapers. People collected newspapers at that time to start their fires, not in the chimney, but in the coal furnace. And we had lots of coal furnaces in the west end of Louisville, but these coal furnaces produced a tremendous pall of soot and dirt. And so every year, you had to get ready to, in springtime, take all your curtains down. They were anywhere close to a register from whence the heat came up, and put them on a big stretching device after you put them in the washing machine, which had, as you may not know, an agitator in the middle. I don't mean an agitator like one who's protesting, but this one actually did clean things. And then you put them through a wringer, which was 2 rolls that you could probably make pancakes with it if you used them at the kitchen. But they would save money, and then they would buy something for the military. They would, for instance, put a plaque on a Jeep dashboard, and that Jeep would be from the class of 1942 or 43 or 43, and with pride in our soldiers, sailors, and Marines, what have you. And that Jeep, quite frankly, became quite a collector's item because of its history. But that is enough of World War II. We find ourselves, however, now in a very precarious situation with China saddling up next to Vladimir Putin in Russia. And he has his hands full, more than he thought, I think, with the Ukrainians. So war is something that we all wish would go away and stay away. But it seems the more we try to do that, the less efficient we are in our negotiations ability. Well, that was the birth. My father was aware that the war was going on because he didn't have to serve in the war, because he was in an industry which made airplane parts. He was in the aluminum business, Reynolds Metals. He would come home from work looking very dirty, because aluminum, as you cut on it and pound it into shape, is dirty work. So he worked with his hands. He was a machinist, and that is one of those certifiable trades that if you have one, that's something that will unfortunately keep you from the war. I had much the same problem, or blessing, when I got out of law school. I was in a protected class of persons in Local Board 43, as was a fellow by the name of Cassius Clay. Cassius Clay grew up, he was 4 years older than me, and he was in the local board where I was registered down on 14th and Broadway. I had registered for the draft. As you know, that war in Vietnam went on for many years. The problem with Local Board 43 was the people, the subjects, of which I was one, were not so numerous. And with Mr. Cassius Clay, who of course is Muhammad Ali, had a religious scruple about him going into the war, saying he had no problems with the Vietnam people. Why should he go over there and kill them? And he actually prevailed in the federal court here in Louisville, in the district court. But I was in the FBI when I got a call during a class at Quantico, Virginia. And at that class, I was studying hard on a very difficult area of FBI work. And someone tapped me on the shoulders, and it happened to be my class counselor. And I thought this would be odd, because that typically didn't happen in Quantico, where you were brought to your attention the fact that your class counselor wanted to have a private conversation with you. I answered that call, went in, he told me to sit down. I said, "Can I ask what this is about?" He says, "Yes, it's about protocol." And I said, "I'm not following you, Mr. Kent." He said, "Well, I understand that you have been deferred from military service because you were in college, thereafter because you were in law school, and thereafter because you were married before a certain date during John Fitzgerald Kennedy's presidency." He had created and carved out a niche of people who ought not go into war. And the reason for that, of course, was we make babies typically as Catholics. That's one of the principles of what we do. You can't have enough babies. And I'm glad to see that you're following that rule.
Amen.
Amen. Lucy, to you too. But so it was that he went on and said, "You're deferred, Mr." That's why Mr. Hoover, that would be as in John Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, the very first director of the FBI, said that these people will not, once they get into the academy, be taken from me because I'm spending a fortune educating special agents of the FBI. And I said, well, I'm just now hearing this. I did not get any kind of a draft notice. He said, well, of course you wouldn't have. Mr. Hoover has the list of people whose mailboxes we're going to guard and make sure that if there's a draft notice coming in from Selective Service, well, then that comes over to me personally. So it went over to Mr. Hoover's floor on the 5th floor of the then FBI building. Well, it is now only Main Justice. The Department of Justice is in there, and the FBI building is right across the street from the Department of Justice is right across the street from the FBI building
So
on
J.
Pennsylvania.
Edgar Hoover was the one who protected you from getting a draft notice directly.
I suppose directly, yes, because what happened, so I was told by my class counselor, Mr. Kent, was that because of the special work we were doing, there were 108 classifications of legal duties we had as agents. One of which was, of course, to pick up people who decided they really didn't want to go in the Army or Navy or Marine Corps or an alternate service, like working at the Veterans Administration Hospital or working on building aircraft or electronic stuff, that sort of thing. But if they did not answer the draft, well, then we had to go out and find them, bring them in, present them to the court and the grand jury, and let the grand jury determine whether they were to be subjected to the criminal law statutes of the day at that time, or go into the service.
So you were rounding up the draft dodgers.
And my first office being Minneapolis, Minnesota, the folks who you just described as Dodgers, they would oftentimes go across the Canadian boundary from International Falls, Minnesota. It's very chilly up there. In fact, it's so cold that it'll make your nose bleed. And I had a bad case of that every day when I was out in the snow. But there was also the problem of people who departed from active duty. That means they were deserters. And they had to be brought in. And I was always more careful with a deserter than a fellow that was of youth age and was going to college, and maybe he didn't remember that he had signed up for the draft. Maybe he didn't sign up for the draft. But in any event, he was more than willing to listen to you and find out, what he might be facing. Now, we couldn't give legal advice to these people. Not all of the agents in the FBI were lawyers. Most of us were at that time. But we also had folks that had come in as accountants because there's a lot of government fraud, even then, particularly then, because unfortunately, as President Dwight Eisenhower warned all of us, when we go to war, we make certain people rich, and they find themselves profiteering off of making things, widgets, for the U.S. Army, the Navy, Marine Corps, and what have you. So that was part of my duty that I really enjoyed. It picked up, you said Dodgers, they really oftentimes were really good folks who were not anxious to commit a crime of any kind, though they were. but to enlighten them to alternative service. Fortunately, as you know, under Mr. Nixon's administration, the draft was abolished, and a volunteer army came out of all of the protestations and demonstrations of that day. I think I've covered your answer with as much information.
Well, we went like from birth to FBI career. So
let me tell you how I got
Very
here.
powerful.
Yeah, no, I'd love to fill in some of the gaps there.
Sure you will.
So, and then, make our way back up to that.
Well, since April the 4th, 1943, I got past being a blue baby and was brought home to live in the West End, which I've always referred to as my West beginning. It was 35th and Dell Park Terrace, which is one block south, one block south of Chestnut, one block north of Broadway. It was on Broadway at 32nd Street. Pardon me a moment, I'm going dry. That I was to meet and come to love the Sisters of Mercy. The Sisters of Mercy were living on East Broadway, and I had established their base there at Mercy High School, which no longer is there,
Right.
but which has moved to a new location. Look, beautiful place they have now out towards the old GE plant. Is gorgeous, and they continue to educate young women of this diocese in a very good way. I learned to play the guitar, which you're interested in, and I've had occasion to listen to your playing it. I learned to play the guitar from Sister Mary Emanuel. Can you imagine a better name for somebody in music? I sang in the choir. I wore a little uniform like everybody else did. That's how you could tell the Catholic kids from the Protestant children and Jewish children, because they all had different kinds of places where they had school.
Now, where were you in school?
Holy Cross.
Okay.
So
It
the
is
same
now.
building that's there today?
The same building is there today. The school is not operational, but is used for housing.
Oh, okay.
It's
So the high school
occupied,
has moved.
and the church is Saint Vincent of Saint
Martin de Porres.
Martin de Porres. And it's fun because they still have the best fish fry in town. Every Lent, I make it a point to get the calendar out and get all my friends that had gone to Holy Cross together. And
Well, and their fish fry is like a lunch too. Right? I don't
Yes,
think
it
they
is.
have a dinner fish fry, but
no, you sat there in the cafeteria
Yeah.
where I sat as a student, and my mother worked as a volunteer cafeteria worker. And everybody does something at that time because you got used to doing something during the war. Women stayed home before that. Then they had to go to work and put B-17s together and other vehicles and aircraft and bullets. And so that meant that they were out of the house. Well, they got used to that. Just like today, people are used to working at home because of COVID. And we're having to deal with that now. So that's how that happened.
There seems to be an ebb and flow to society and history. Like there's times where the couple is at home working, and then there's times where they're pulled out because of war or tragedy or difficulties that force everyone to work on an exorbitant level. And then moments like COVID, which is unprecedented in our lifetime now, now a lot of people, I mean, they call it the Great Resignation. People have quit their jobs and are now working at home or not working at all, depending on the situation. And that's a new phenomenon, but it's interesting.
It's odd, John, but there are ebbs and flows, as you say. It's difficult to take someone out of their world and put them into another world where nothing is the same. In fact, somebody had to work in the kitchen to make sure the children were fed, somebody to be home to let the younger children in. They were called latchkey kids at that time. The oldest usually got the job of being the one to open the can of soup and pour it into a pot and throw in whatever else you had in the ice box, which is now, of course, a refrigerator appliance. Everything changes, even the lexicon of the day. But so we got along. We knew that we had a mission in World War II and that everybody was affected by it. I must say that there were a good number of priests of the diocese who were taken as chaplain, and they filled a very needed part of the world's need for priests behind lines. If you go across, we're on 5th Street just now, across 5th Street from the cathedral, you will see evidence of the participation by religious people in chaplaincy positions. And
In the war.
Wow. Typically, the hood of a Jeep was used for the altar.
I've seen a picture of that from, actually, there may be one back here.
Yeah, the priest goes to war.
Yeah.
See right behind you there?
Yes.
There's here, priest goes to war, talking about Reverend Thomas McDonald. He was national director of the Society for the Propagation of the Faith at that time, but or at a particular time. There was also another priest that I knew. His hometown was in Wichita, Kansas, not too far from there, called Father Capon or Father Capon. Some people pronounce it different ways. He was in Korea.
Yes.
And he would celebrate Mass on the hood of the Jeep, but he ended up dying in one of the internment camps in a very horrific way, but praying with so many of the soldiers as POWs, and very courageous life. So his cause for canonization has actually been opened, and he's progressing pretty well. It's a very powerful story.
Well, he's earned it, that's for sure. There are a number of priests who have had much the same kind of story. And when you have that many youngsters, and let's face it, we were bringing youngsters in, males for the most part, at age 18, and others seeing all of their brothers going, and not being the eldest of the latchkey kids, getting their brothers and sisters in the house after school. Well, they saw everybody else of the same bracket age and said, I'm 18. Well, we had a war to fight, and we didn't have a lot of people to figure out whether he was really lying about his age or not.
Right.
And they put it in. I wound up having a client many, many years after that who went into war, just as I say, at 17. And word got through to the commandant of that particular unit, and they grabbed him up and brought him in and ascertained that he had no way of proving he was not 18 or was 18. And he became quite an inventor of tooling used by millions of factories around the world, cutting steel and preparing it to make skyscrapers. He learned to do things that made him aware of gadgetry, tools, cranes, heavy things that make big buildings. So you get something out of your military service. You can't go and serve without learning something.
Yeah,
Most
my
important.
sister was in the Marine Corps, and it was definitely life-changing experience for her in the early 2000s because she entered a year before September 11th, and her husband at the time went to Afghanistan and Iraq, and so it was very intense kind of growing up hearing about those stories on a very personal level because I had my own sister, in that. Now she was spared from having to serve because she was pregnant at the time with my niece. So praise the Lord for that. But it was she did lose friends of hers during that time.
But she gained a child.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and
Another Catholic soul.
That's right. That's right. It's a beautiful gift. But yeah.
And that happens to also put one in touch with one's own self. Because you look at yourself in terms of, well, not only why me now and why me doing this, and that kind of goes back to what I told you about Cassius Clay now, Muhammad Ali. But you look deeply within yourself. Can you kill a person? Is there a justified killing there? Well, that's a pretty hefty thing when you've learned that. And you've also learned about the Ten Commandments. Obviously, there's a conflict between what your government's telling you to do and what your church teaches you can't do. Mm-hmm. So those are all things that are resolved, and with the help of the priests in the Army, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, that helped in that regard, to have someone who has God with him all the time. Got his own Jeep, got a case with a chalice, had a portable organ, which unfolded, and of course he had pedals on the bottom of it, and it would work just like any other organ. They have one of those across the street at Patterson. So.
Amazing.
Huh. That's cool. I haven't seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never even heard of that.
Well, so
That's pretty cool.
went into grade school, and
at Holy Cross.
At Holy Cross.
And just to clarify, not to derail you, but so you grew up in the West End. Your parish was St. Martin de Porres.
It was. Only
Okay.
It was Holy Cross at that time.
Oh,
So Holy
okay.
Cross is St. Martin de Porres.
Everything was
okay.
renamed a few years back.
I see. Yeah. Well, maybe I'm aging myself or something. Given
You're
that
a youngin'.
away.
It's fine.
I'm a whippersnapper. Yeah.
Please
Okay.
don't talk about age when I'm here. That seems now to be the common source of conversation with the present chief of our government, and that we don't want to get into. But clearly, we're addressing the matter now of how long do you serve as an elected servant? Is there a time when you've gone over the hill?
Yeah.
Is what the phrase was. But, and that was originally a military slogan.
Well, I think it comes down to just if you are called to the position, if you're meant to be there, as well as the just awareness that you have to have as a human being and ability to make hard decisions and things like that. Like I know he'll be 100 years old, I think, next year. And he was in World War II. We interviewed him back in January, my good friend, Mr. Oliver Thibodeau, Tip for short. And he shared a story of, even today, he's very, very active and he still cuts his grass. Still drives himself to the senior center every time, or 3 times a week. Very, very active man. Very sharp as well. But he shared the story of a friend of his who didn't believe in God until his head was basically blown up almost completely in the field, and he begged him to baptize him. And Tip ended up finding water in the trenches and baptizing this man right before he died in his arms.
Oh, my.
And
There were so many of those instances.
the things that people experience, like you're talking about tapping into your soul, like really understanding what it means to go to war or to live through tough times or to make those hard decisions and somehow still find hope and faith in the resurrection, in a better world, in the aftermath of such tragedy. I mean, we're 50 or what is it, 80 years removed from World War II?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's 80 now. Yeah.
80 years removed. And yet the effects of that are still playing out even today, of how people think and how people live. And what people believe about life, even after death. And so we have just to take that in and hopefully allow that to bring conversion and healing and not further despair.
And to learn about, again, yourself
Right.
and what you can do to participate in a meaningful way to bring other people to Christ.
Yeah.
He had to face the worst of all tortures. And if you can think of Christ dying not for himself, but because his Father had planned that to save our souls, what greater purpose could you have? But here, when they dropped the gate on the landing ship tank boats, they went into shallow water and dropped their gate, let out the tanks and the men, the trucks and the jeeps, but also the LSPs, personnel. Again, a shallow running boat. There you had the men, as soon as the gate was down, receiving MP-40, the German machine gun fire, a rapid firing weapon faster than anything we had, hitting you, pinging off the doors and the gates of the ship. And dying before they even stepped off the craft. That was really a sacrifice. And the priest had to give a lot of last rites there, and a lot of people making the decision to change and become whatever they were into Christians and Catholic Christians, or whatever their inclination was.
That reminds me of a story I heard of a Mary Knoll missionary, and I think everyone's familiar with there's no atheists in a foxhole, but his argument was there's nothing but Catholics in a foxhole because he said they see the mortar fire coming, and it's striking down near them, and it's getting closer. So he told everyone in the trench, he said, I'm going to give all the Catholics a general absolution, and I'll give everyone who's not a Catholic a blessing. And a Jewish fellow stood up and said, to hell with the blessing, Father, give us all absolution.
Well, and
my God.
that is an a frequent sort of thing that would happen. They were scared. They were throwing up inside the boat. They saw their buddies with whom they trained going into pieces, literally. And all they wanted to do is keep their head below something that might be bigger than themselves, so they wouldn't get hit. If you're able to see the Band of Brothers, my wife and I went to Germany several years back, and went from where they planned the invasion in London and then in Portsmouth, England, where with the jumping off point, to go across Normandy. These people were ready. They were ready on June the 5th. Unfortunately, that being the plan, all plans are to be broken, or as it's said in Catholic circles, what happens when you make plans? God laughs. Well, I don't know that he laughed here, but June the 5th was not only my anniversary date as a husband, but it was also the day before they actually jumped off, June the 6th. And there's a picture of Dwight David Eisenhower and the people that were our allies, the French, the English, the Swedes. There were a number of fighting soldiers that landed at Omaha Beach. And of course, the other countries were Sword and and gold and so forth, but they were all called the Allies. They had to cut through all that chaff. And then, of course, behind the wall that they called the Atlantic Wall, the Germans did, because the general who was in charge of all of that had for many months had construction of that wonderful wall that they thought they had. It was hard. And the people at Point du Hoc, which was a little bit north of Gold Beach and Omaha Beach, they had to climb rope ladders to get up on the top of the hill and then fight their way in. And of course, as they were climbing up those really light ladders, the Germans would push the top of the ladder off and they would fall off and die right there. But then they'd use bandoliers to shoot charges that would break off pieces of the cliff at the top, and then they could climb in a little bit easier.
You know, I was watching a movie. It's a classic movie, Saving Private Ryan.
Yes.
You know, it came out probably 20, 25 years ago now, if you can believe that. And some of the men who went and survived Normandy went to see the premiere, and they had to leave early because of how realistic that first scene, opening scene is from that movie. Very, very powerful. Another one that really connected with me about the horrors of the war was The Pianist with Adrian Brody, which was very, very powerful. But also, and this kind of relates to you in your life a little bit on some level, because my confirmation saint is St. Maximilian Kolbe, and he sacrificed his life for a prisoner in World War II in Auschwitz. And when a man escaped prison, the Nazis lined 10 men to die by starvation. And as one man was being selected, he cried out he'll never see his wife and family again. Maximilian Kolbe was a priest who was a political prisoner, and he offered to take his life. And the Nazi officer was so shocked that he allowed him to take his place. And the man he saved was actually at his canonization in Rome 40 years later, when St. Maximilian Kolbe became a saint. And so he was also the only saint who's a licensed amateur radio operator, which, that makes sense since he created an international magazine and had this huge vision for changing the world with the use of media for the Catholic world. And you are also a licensed amateur radio operator, right?
We call ourselves hams.
That's right. Yep. That's.
And I think we're probably that very thing. We're called hams because we talk all the time, and that's not a problem. But for those who are charged with listening to us, it is a problem.
Yep. So my dad's an amateur radio operator as well, a ham radio operator, and he got me my license when I was 12 years old. So it's good to have a fellow ham at the table for our podcast.
Isn't it a thrill to know that you can sit in one place in the world as it spins and talk with people behind the Iron Curtain, or what used to be the Iron Curtain. I've talked with people in Moscow, and well, hey, if they know English, they get on there and want to talk to another continent, another place, somewhere outside of their environment of totalitarianism. Okay, so we have Sister Mary Emanuel teaching me the guitar. She also was in charge of the choir, and I couldn't keep myself out of that. I sing at home. I sing in the bathtub. I sing all the time, and drive my wife crazy because she doesn't know all the words. But she's good about it, and we've been married 58 years. But she's kind of losing her hearing a little, and I have as well. Sometimes I don't hear my own self sing. Sister Mary Emanuel would have that 8 o'clock Mass every day, and that was fun. It really was. And when you're a part of the liturgy, as you know, you are a part of finding Christ in species, and it's the real Christ, and it's ours, and it's our faith. And without that faith being the bedrock of what you're going to do in your life, whatever it will be, and you won't know when you're the age of 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th, you've got some theories about what you want to do. You know what your parents do. You know what your parents' friends oftentimes do. And you, discover Boy Scouts. And I'll tell you that that is the one major point of direction my compass points to. I started in the Scouts at age 11, and I'm still on the district court board of review for Eagle Scouts. In fact, I was just doing that last week at St. Margaret Mary. It's interesting that we have this cornucopia of professions and occupations and vocations at your fingertips in Boy Scouting. Now, all of our churches aren't able to sponsor an organization and have a scout meeting every Wednesday, which was our time, or Thursdays, typically in the middle of the week, so you don't bump into homework problems for you, or the weekend quizzes that were given by the people that taught us. But we all looked forward to that Wednesday when you've got a good scoutmaster and he has a good program for you, perhaps a speaker who's been doing something really meaningful, like working with NASA or what have you, to come in and tell you, you know, I was your age and I was wondering what I was going to do. And that kind of makes you feel like, hey, that's the next tree I'm going to climb. And you go on down the forest with some direction.
I was also in Boy Scouting all the way until about 17. I didn't quite make it to Eagle just because of timing and other factors. But
I thought you were going to say because Papa Chuck was on the review
right,
board.
he was on the review board. That was good. That was good.
I would have remembered that.
Yeah, my brother-in-law, he ended up making Eagle, and it was a very cool time in our lives because his Eagle Scout project was to make, I think, 2,000 or 3,000 rosaries to send them across seas. So it's
How many?
2,000 or 3,000 rosaries. It was a huge rosary campaign. You know, Stephen.
Yeah.
That was his Eagle Scout project. So
I didn't know he was an Eagle Scout.
yeah, he's a
Would have given us something to talk about.
really well. There you go.
Yeah.
Now you
You
know.
know I'm an Eagle Scout?
I did not know that.
He is an Eagle Scout.
Look
His
at that.
brothers are both Eagle Scouts.
Wow.
Yes, indeed. And all of my children were Eagle Scouts, except for my daughter. She was a Gold Award with the Girl Scouts.
Praise the Lord.
I don't know whether you all know it or not, but we don't have Boy Scouts anymore. We have Scouts of America.
Right.
And we have women now in scouting. And that has been a positive. I will tell you right now, I had my concerns. You know, they're not going to want to make a dam to get enough water so we'll be able to wash our dishes after we eat. Of course, you get the water out and you let it settle of its silt and so forth, and then you put it into a salamander, which heats up the water so it'll be hot enough for the germs to be killed. But it could look mud stained when you ate out of it the next time. It won't kill you. Little girls typically would go, ooh, and they wouldn't be really called to that if they saw that without being up front and seeing if there were any larvae crawling around on the inside of it. But no, all the experiences that we have, particularly with the vocations, we have vocations for police and fire, factory work, engineering, all of it in the merit badge. It's simply a potpourri of vocations that you can be called to or choose.
Yeah, well, and I'd like to ask, so how did that at both? I mean, both scouting. Obviously, that was an important part of your, your life and your upbringing, and then also growing up Catholic here in the Archdiocese of Louisville. So, how did those two things, in conjunction with one another, inform your vocation, both your vocation to marriage and family life, and also your vocation to, being a lawyer and getting into the FBI. By the way, very grateful you chose marriage and family life, because I'm here, and I like being here. And that's also borne fruit in that now you're having a great granddaughter. So, anyways, yeah. So how is that upbringing that you've just sort of described, how did that inform what you chose in your adult life?
Your question is broad, and it's essentially right on the money, because as young men, and we've all gone through this, we've all wondered, what should we do in life? And when you're age 16, and you smell gas fumes, and that means there's a car close, and now you got to get your license, and you want to learn how to tear it down to rebuild it, which is one of my hobbies. And then you begin to smell perfume at about that time, and you become aware of the fact that, well, there's no more than two chromosome patterns. There's X, Y, and then there's just X's. And so don't be confused. That's biology and that's science, and we pay homage to science, but not beyond what we learn in our religion and what we have formed with our faith. But when you learn that these distractions are around, and that they're a basis of forming a union with someone with whom you will live for the rest of your life, then you got your own little baby factory. And then you can really go to work on becoming a good Catholic father, grandfather, and to be great-grandfather. So that's kind of what happened there. But as I was going through the merit badges, I went to a gentleman by the name of Bushmeyer. And Mr. Bushmeyer was a judge, and I needed to get my citizenship in the community done and the law merit badge. And so, killing two birds with one stone, I called Judge Bismeyer was his name. Bissmeyer. Lived down on the western end of Broadway, and then along the Northwestern Parkway. And he had me in and had me sit down, and I brought my little booklet for the merit badge and handed it to him so he would know what questions he had to ask. But he knew them pretty well, because he frequently was asked by people to sign off on his merit badge. That gentleman caught me with his hook. And at that point, when I walked out of his house, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. It was that moment in time, through scouting, that a judge of this circuit took time from his busy life to talk to a gentleman who was 12. And I looked at the marvelous house in which he lived. I knew of his reputation. I think I even worked in a campaign for him along the way for re-election. But here's where it all comes back. In Louisville, we are so fortunate that we have a 4 to 6% connection with people. That is to say, you're going to know every 10 people, you're going to know 6 of them, or you're going to know one of the members of the family of one of those 6 people. And that's the beauty of this city in which we live.
Yeah, it's a big city, small town feel, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now that may change some as the immigrants come in from whatever country they're coming in. And we wish them well, and we hope that they are of good mind and positive mission, because we know that among them there are sleepers, what the FBI calls sleepers, that are antithetical to our way of living. And so we have to keep track of all of that. And right now, I'm afraid the administration has not covered it to the point where we can rely upon knowing who's who and where they are. Now, that gentleman, Mr. Judge Bismarck, had a daughter. She became a lawyer. And I told her what had happened after it happened. I was a lawyer, probably for, maybe 14 or 15, no, more like 20 years. And I became elected to the office of president of the Louisville Bar Association. And that covers the whole city and metro area involved. I had my year. I gave all the speeches and attended every event appropriate, went to school and taught youngsters about the law and what have you. And one day, in a place on 4th Street, in a cafe which lawyers typically ate their lunch, I saw Judge Bismarck. And he came over to me and he said, "Mr. President, you've had a good year." And I said, "Judge, right back at you. If it weren't for a certain well-remembered memory that I have of how I got my law and citizenship merit badges at your home, and you being the teacher and merit badge counselor, I wouldn't be a lawyer. And if I weren't a lawyer, I wouldn't be sitting here with you because I would be doing something else. So I'm afraid you're going to have to take all the credit for whatever success you think I've had this year. Thank you very much." It's just that way. It works that way. It's a big city with small connections that turn into lifelong connections.
That was like a seed that became, the entire trajectory of your life. And there's something beautiful to that you were able to do good things. And even your work in the FBI led to some pretty intense cases, I've heard. There's a lot of that as well.
I think, given how long we've gone, I think we should take a break real quick.
Let's take a
break.
Then
let's get into that because I wanted to ask you. I really had two major talking points or questions that I wanted to get your thoughts on.
Well, we can do that right at the beginning of the next segment.
Let's do that.
All right.
Stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back after the break.
Hey everyone, another sponsor for today's episode is the Cathedral of the Assumption in the heart of downtown Louisville, Kentucky. It is the spiritual center of parish and family life and is a historic treasure for the Catholic Church in America. Take a tour or consider visiting for Mass. Check them out at cathedraloftheassumption.org.
All right, well, we're back with Charlie Ricketts, a.k.a. Papa Chuck, on Spirit and Spire. So, Papa Chuck.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you about, kind of shifting back. We've been talking about the Scouts and your career. Shifting back a little bit, I just wanted to get your thoughts, perspective on growing up Catholic, kind of, and having memories from both before and after the Second Vatican Council, and how did things shift liturgically, culturally, otherwise? What thoughts do you have there?
You're very impressionable when you were in grade school. You've heard me talk about my time as a member of the choir. I also served as an altar boy. There were a couple of good reasons to be an altar boy. Most importantly, you're closer physically to the action. You are with the priest, typically at 6 o'clock in the morning, where the people are going to catch me for the first year or so. And so I take my bicycle over and park it next to Father Maloney's garage. He was the pastor at that time. He had
the one who became the bishop, or the one
no. This was a brother.
The brother. Was he the boys' home one?
I'm sorry.
There was the Father Maloney's. There's a boys' home in town. Is this the same Father?
No. That he was out in Kansas. Trying to remember where Boys Haven is.
Not Boys Haven. There's one in town. I don't know. It might have been the
No,
same.
I'm confusing Boys Town with Boys Haven. Boys Town is in the Midwest. I believe either Oklahoma or Kansas. I forget which, but Father Maloney began, and this was a cousin of the Father Maloney I'm talking about at Holy Cross, now St. Martin de Porres. He would very often have the 6 o'clock mass, in spite of the fact that he was up in age. He had a huge not German Shepherd, but the big dogs that carry the cask of brandy.
Saint Bernard.
Saint Bernard, of course.
I was thinking of that old childhood cartoon, Bernie the Saint Bernard, that my grandma always showed me. It was a VHS tape from the 90s. Anyway, random thing that made me realize that. So, moving on.
He was a memorable pet. We all loved him, and he always loved us. But as anybody who's ever been around a Saint Bernard knows, one of their more unpleasant features is that they slobber all the time. You don't have to wait until the depths of winter or the heat of the summer. They sweat, they stink, they shed all over you. And they always look for clean cassocks and surplices. And because, well, my mother used to gain points with the Lord by getting every week a carload of surplices to put through the machine and the wringer and all that sort of thing. And of course, I'd help her with that. But I wasn't any good with ironing the things, but they looked beautiful. And when we had special times when many priests would be there, say for 40 hours, when all the priests in a diocese would get together to have that ceremony, the dog just loved that opportunity because, well, hey, fresh meat and starched things, and so they would put their paws on your shoulder and look you straight in the eye. And meanwhile, all of them had damp undersides and jaws, which contained lots of moisture. And you'd walk out on the altar looking somewhat crestfallen because you were presenting yourself to our Lord. And we know how he must have looked at the time they took him to Calvary. And there were no wounds, obviously. You were bleeding. You were just dirty. And dirt and church, in my mind, somehow get disassociated one from the other. But you're with the priest who is essentially conducting the transubstantiation. The body of Christ and the blood of Christ are there next to you. So when you got in there and you went to the prayers at the foot of the altar, you said them in Latin. Yes, 5th graders, 4th graders, learning to be, were learning Deum qui laetificat juventutem meum. And that is, I've come to the altar of God. And you began then to really focus on what you're doing there. You're part of what's going to happen as a part of that ceremony, time-honored ceremony, given to us by Christ himself in the upper room. It makes you part of something much bigger than you'll ever be. Spiritually, it is a thick atmosphere full of grace. It makes you think deeply about what is my role in making sure that what Peter took on from our Lord would remain a part of this culture this humanity for years well beyond your being on this planet, that makes you feel so humble. And when you do those things, and then of course you went with the priest to the communion rail with a paten, a saucer, if you will, attached to a holder or knob or handle, and you put it under each person's chin while they took the species, the body of Christ, from the priest. We didn't want any hosts on the floor. Unfortunately, times, never for me, but times will occur when someone moves in the wrong way and the host falls on the floor, at which time you get a purifier and place it on top of the host. And that will be a point where, before Mass is over, you will recover that and put it back in the ciborium for future use. Once it, of course, is made the body and blood of Christ, it is important that certain special rules, then under pre-Vatican II rules, that it be recovered that way. And now, of course, at post-Vatican, we take it in our hands and place it up on our tongue if that's our choice. Or we can have the priest put it on our tongue, but we still have that precious moment that your entire concentrated ability is at focus. Now, a moment ago, we talked about scouting. I think I missed one point I should have made, and that is there is an Altare Dei award that Boy Scouting hands out. You earn it because you have to go through a rather tight regimen of requirements that will put you in a place where you know what the symbols are of Christianity and the Catholic Church. You learn church history. You really dedicate yourself to being one who's read up on and has written something about how that affects you, what it was meant to say to the world, because in that room, he was telling these disciples, this is my body. This is my blood. And we celebrate that in the same way every time we go and participate in the Holy Mass. That was one reason why you should be happy to be a altar boy. You got out of class for funerals and other special things to do. And on top of all of that, they might give you a stipend, the people who are part of the family that are in attendance at that funeral or that wedding or whatever you're doing. But again, you're seeing these sacraments, these special sacraments working. Now, we all won't get all of them very often, because if you go to holy orders, well, that means you've given up the option of being a part of the married part of our faith. And you will take a wife and you will build a family, souls for Christ. But nevertheless, that's part of Boy Scouting on the Catholic side.
That was not something that I heard of growing up in the scouting program.
Altare Dei.
Yeah, we never knew of any of the Catholic elements. And
Interesting.
that was partly because our scoutmaster wasn't, Catholic, and that made a difference. We just weren't aware of those things. But to know those elements are there, that there's a redeemable quality about Boy Scouting that makes it feel like there's something that you can really glean from that, because I know a lot of people were disillusioned when some of the changes were made initially about 10 years ago, and it all really comes down to your leadership.
Mm.
It's all about your troop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in I was in troop 319 out of St. Leonard, and a lot of families from Holy Spirit were there as well. And I remember we did the Adultare Day, which was interesting. Like looking back on it, so I actually have that medal award, and
He's not bragging though.
no, not at all.
Humility.
But what's so
But everyone needs to know.
everyone, yes. What's so funny though is that the name Adultare Dei, Latin for to the altar of God, and that comes from the prayers at the foot of the altar in the traditional Latin Mass, which then became like much more my spirituality much later or much more recently. So that's the primary Mass that my wife and I attend here at the Shrine of St. Martin of Tours. And then I also had the privilege of serving and continue to have the privilege of serving at the altar as a server at that Mass. So you're like telling these stories, and like I'm very familiar, with the priest says Introiba Adultare Dei, and the servers will respond Adeum quae latificati ventutum meum. Yeah. So that's just pretty cool that like there's this award in scouting, like we have this kind of common experience of scouting, and then the very name of that award ended up being tied to this rite of the Mass that I now call home. So that's pretty neat.
And it is our home. I didn't mean to shortchange scouting, because in the Cub Scouts, which are younger scouts, they have a Parvuli Dei award, which is a much less stringent and less regimented preparation for the reception of that award. But you'll very often see them taken from their blue Cub Scout uniforms going into their olive drab or khaki uniforms, and then eventually they too will go after an Adultare Dei award. Okay, so that brought us together with scouting. Now, another feature of serving Mass is that when you are a server and you are a Boy Scout and you're in the woods and there's not a church within 20 miles, you will experience having Mass like the soldiers do, outside. And so you spend a good bit of time getting an altar ready as best you can. And you really feel the essence of pure worship. You're not distracted, but you're aware of the nature that God made to feed us, to give us beauty, to give us the opportunity to know Him, and then introspectively search our own souls. And you've got your buddies who are part of this same experience, and you feel a closeness to those gentlemen that you can't describe. You're young, you're impressionable, and you're with Christ. And that's pretty important and pretty heavy. So you're making promises every time you do that, and you're reinforcing what you do with regard to the sacraments that you are able to celebrate later in life. Seeing the experience as an altar boy got me to thinking, and every young Catholic boy goes through this, I'm convinced. You'll begin to think about the priesthood. And we know that Father Landback would like to be here hearing me say that, because that's what he's charged with doing, finding young men who can take on the mantle of responsibility and rid himself of the distractions of things that might be a part of some other sacraments, such as marriage, uh, those things are taken away from the priesthood, and willingly by a person who wants to more perfectly prepare himself for the Christ he will meet at judgment.
I've heard it described as foregoing the marriage of Genesis to embrace the marriage of the Lamb.
Very well said.
So it's the idea of allowing earthly marriage not to be lowered as if it's less than or worse than, or not as good as, but rather to look at the priesthood as objectively the superior vocation, but not necessarily subjectively perfect for every human being, right? Yes. Objectively speaking, you're foregoing the marriage of Genesis, because the marriage of Genesis of man and woman is meant to point us to the ultimate marriage that we are all called to have in heaven with God, right? And that priests and even consecrated religious sisters and brothers will point us to that. So really, I think, and it's the same with, whether you celebrate Mass outside and creation and nature, or you celebrate Mass on a high altar, or you celebrate Mass in the Novus Ordo post-Vatican II way, it really is about reclaiming the sacramental worldview to help people see as God sees, to see these things and gestures and movements in the liturgy, and even in our lives and our vocations, because the liturgy should lead us to live a life, liturgical life. We should be able to see those things pointing us to God at every moment, right? And that, I think, is the essence of the liturgy, and everything you're describing with pre-Vatican II, and even what we're able to experience in certain parishes today, like the Shrine of St. Martin's. Like, that's a beautiful example. To me, that is about reclaiming a sense of the sacred, the reverence. Like, how often do we pay attention to the Eucharist if it falls on the ground? Like, I've seen people just pick it up real quick and eat it, and that's like, it's almost like a I don't know what else to do kind of moment. And there's no protocol, because the protocol has been lost or forgotten or neglected.
I've heard of what Papa Chuck had said about the cloth being placed over it. I've heard of people that weren't serious about their faith as children, but because of a mistake during Mass, and saw how it was handled by the altar servers and the priest, that really ingrained in them a belief in the true presence, and that if the host hadn't have fallen, and they hadn't have seen the reaction, the good reaction to it, that they weren't in disbelief, they were just young, but it really was left a large impression.
A teaching moment.
Yeah. To have seen that reaction from the pew. I think that the story I heard, the father had them stay after they had seen it happen. Father had them stay after everybody else had left to see how the priest handled it, and it was really beautiful. Yeah.
Ceremony is big in Boy Scouting. Take the American flag.
Yeah.
There are lots of rules, probably not known by most folks, on how you treat that flag, how you fold the flag, how you unfold the flag, how you pull it up rapidly when you are at the standard upon which it's flying, and then when you take it down and fold it into the shape of a cocked hat, reminiscent of the Revolutionary War. George Washington wore a cocked hat. And so that's what that's all about. Then, of course, there's, after the flag becomes so tattered, that we have a ceremony that is the burning of the flag, and what is said while that's happening, and you're saluting the flag as it undergoes this transformation.
And only the military and the scouts can retire a flag. That's one thing I've learned, and it's a very powerful thing to witness.
Yes,
we've done flag retirement ceremonies almost every 4th of July at my mom and dad's, because my brother-in-law leads that with my sister, who's in the Marine Corps. So it's a very powerful experience.
It really is.
It's the essence of ceremony that people are starving for, that in our society where people have lost their faith or never got their faith to begin with, and a lot of it comes from these wars that have ravaged people's minds and thought and hopes, but also the secularism and materialism that we're dealing with today, with the technological revolution. All of those things have made people, I think, desensitized to the mysterious. And so we have I think, complacency. I'm just kind of comfortable with what I can feel or touch or taste or see, instead of trusting that there's something beyond what you can see or sense that's worth understanding, worth getting to know. And that's the person of Jesus Christ, right? He's the mystery we're all searching for. Instead of, like, I've heard Google or pornography or social media where people just scroll forever. That's an infinite search. But true love is a search for the infinite. And that's the difference, I think, that what ceremony gives us. And that's why people are religious. There's a lot of people who say, I'm spiritual but not religious. That's just a way of saying, I don't want to do anything to prove that I believe in God. I just want to say I do and feel it inside without sharing it. But there's no proof in that, right? No. We need the ceremony. It's so important.
Or ritual.
A ritual, right? Yeah. Right? It's so critical.
It is critical. And, of course, in the Scouts, you have a good bit of that. And we do it over and over and over. And we learn discipline. We learn that you listen to the senior patrol leader. You listen to your patrol leader. You listen to the Boy Scout Scoutmaster, Troop Scoutmaster. And you don't question that. Now, you'll have time to talk with him or her and sit on a stump out in the woods and get something off your chest. You will learn to communicate in a deep way.
It's a good example of hierarchy, like the magisterium of the church, right?
I have a dear friend who is a retired deacon who was in the FBI. He was a polygrapher, so he knew when to spot when somebody was not telling the truth, and then have to write that up so that the enforcement part of the program of justice is fed facts which now have passed the rigors of a polygraphy moment where you're wired up and all of your pulses are accounted for, and the moisture in your skin, the heartbeat and heart rate, the temperature, all of these things are measured. And of course you have questions that are, wrong, that are asked of you, and you're told there are going to be things that are going to be asked, and they instruct you, now we want you to say something along the lines of, we want you to lie. We want you to say that you've never touched a host without the proper protocol. If it's a matter of dealing with some feature of your life where Catholicism's rules were some part of you by virtue of your education. And he has gone from law enforcement to now being a deacon. And he was very close to Archbishop McDonough and came to talk at the cathedral one evening mass. My wife and I were there, and so Archbishop McDonough began his remarks, homily, by saying, I must confess that I did not have a prepared homily for this evening. I didn't get a notice until just after noon. And so I asked Father Fichterman, who now has passed and was a dear friend of mine. He was the rector at the cathedral.
He's a wonderful man, yeah.
It truly was.
Fichterman, yeah.
We bagged groceries at Winn-Dixie together when we were young and went to Bellarmine College together.
That's so cool.
He was a chemist.
Yeah.
He was with DuPont. And then when he saw that his dad had died, he was very much in honor, or had a deep respect for his mother as a representative of the Blessed Virgin. And so he said, I'm not going to marry Mother. I'm going to stay here with you and take care of you. And he did so. And he was such a lovely man. I mean, everything out of his mouth he thought about. And it came through the filtration of all the education he had and all the experiences that he had. It was just a perfect man to run the chief parish of the Archdiocese, the cathedral. But anyway, these things all fit together. And you know where the lines are in your life. And that is made clear to you through an education at a Catholic grade school. And now, unfortunately, we do not have those lovely ladies who dedicate themselves to Christ and to the education of his children. But we don't have that. So we're going to homeschooling in many instances. And so the whole thing is, I'm afraid, being watered down somewhat. Fortunately, we're concentrating on that, and we're looking for answers. And more is being given to us by the divine intervention. And I see that in many instances. When you get to be my age, you know that something happens that you can't explain, but it was good. And so it had to come from on high. Then, as I was saying, I was building on these experiences. Every young Catholic boy about that age of 4th, 5th, 6th grade gives serious thought to priesthood. I think everyone in this room probably has had that experience. Am I worthy of it?
Except my wife, I think.
Right.
You have made us all proud and better Catholics by your example, my son. And now to be in a position of the threshold to fatherhood, you'll use these things we're talking about and understand that there's some things you just can't explain. Now, confession is something that we have that used to scare the bejesus out of me. I would do it every Saturday afternoon. And I was told by several of the good sisters that I was scrupulous. I had to go home and look that up. I didn't quite know what that meant, but it's the too much of something good situation where you try to eat 4 bowls of ice cream and you know, then you've got a calamity on your hands when you go to bed.
That's one way of putting it.
Never heard scrupulosity described that way, but whatever.
That's what it was with this Catholic kid.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so you're beginning to look outside too and see other people like Judge Bismarck, of whom I spoke a while ago, and get other champions of good, clean, Christ-like behavior. John Ford comes to mind to me. He was the attorney for the priest that wrote the book 7-Story Mountain, Thomas Merton. And to give advice to Thomas Merton, I mean, that puts goosebumps on my back. John and I became friends before I went to law school while he was teaching at Bellarmine College. He and his wife, Mary Lloyd, had a home, still do. Of course, John is no longer with us, in Audubon Park. And I still have some of his law books at my house, which I just won't get rid of because of what they mean to me. That he was the one who gave it to me. And I was able to help him on some very serious things during the time when the church was under fire for some unexplainable misbehavior among the clerics. But I was drawn by him, another good Catholic man, to the profession of law. Now, I've got all these things coming at me through the Scouts, through Catholic education, that a lot of people don't have a chance to see, to experience, and to act on.
You have quite the perspective, right?
Yes.
The experience that you've gained from this.
Yes, you're now up at the 3,000 foot level of altitude. I don't know that I told you, but I'm also a pilot. So
Oh, wow.
I think that's one
Literally.
way to get on high and closer to God. But not because of the physical distance between us and heaven, but because of the option to, or rather the need to be very good at controlling the aircraft when you don't expect a cloud to come upon you.
Right.
But in any
You might
event,
meet God a lot sooner than you think, right?
you never. There are no non-believers in the cockpit. There really are not.
Only Catholics.
Well, no, a lot of good Protestants. I think pilot Sully, who took the airplane, you'll recall, a few years back into the East River in New York. He laid that. He made a perfect landing on water, and all of the passengers lived to tell about it. So, how is all this explained? I mean, where would you find a Sully, which was his nickname, if you were to go into an airport and say, I want to take an airplane to Chicago or French Lick, Indiana, or wherever? You don't. But God's watching, and he's not going to let anything happen to his flock that will not wind up in some other direction that's much better than you thought you were going to have if you'd gone to Chicago or French Lick. You may be on the other side of the dirt, but you're going to be better off. And you have to believe that. And that's part of faith.
Sorry, well, and that was actually a lot of our previous episode on, we just recorded last week on suffering and the purpose of suffering and what that all means. And that was kind of part of our discussion was how God will only allow suffering in proportion to the greater good that he can draw from it. And sometimes, that's not always obvious to us, but, maybe that comes in the next life.
Hey everyone, this week's episode is sponsored by Family Renewal Project. FRP is a local theology of the body apostolate in service to the Archdiocese of Louisville. They're dedicated to renewing the culture through the renewal of the family. They have so many amazing things going on, so check them out at familyrenewalproject.com.
I did have kind of one other question or topic that I wanted to talk about, so maybe we could you could give a quick little overview of it. But you were the defense counsel in the Mel Ignatow case here in Louisville, and that's one of the more interesting stories that I've heard of yours. And so I would love if you could kind of share that with our audience. And
tell people what it is if they haven't heard of it, because I hadn't heard of it somehow. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
so
guess
just
I'm out of touch with some of this.
from the perspective of the defense counsel. Yeah.
Well, and I hope that people don't believe that I bore all of my grandchildren with stories every time they come to my place. Sometimes I bore them elsewhere, but in any event, that was a significant period of time in my life as a lawyer. I, of course, had already served as a special agent of the FBI, about which we've talked earlier. But the matter of having a case come to you with the problem to be solved by the judge and jury was, will this man lose his life for having murdered his girlfriend and buried her body and then having a favorable verdict of not guilty for what he did. I pray that none of you have to go through any of that kind of experience. Mel Ignatow was a client of mine for perhaps 5 years before this incident occurred. I had written his mother's will. She was a Catholic, and her husband was a Jewish man. They worked together in a grocery store, which they owned in South Louisville. They built a wonderful life for their children, and I met all of those people, his brother and his sisters. He had 2 lovely daughters, and he had taken this young girl with whom he had a relationship out and did what I just described. It even hurts to remember this, but if you're really interested in it, there's a book called Double Jeopardy, and it's written by Bob Hill, who used to be with the Courier-Journal. The whole trial was pretty well documented with that. And it was difficult for me, who, upon leaving the Bureau, became the first assistant Commonwealth's attorney, who would prosecute and then assign certain cases which were not of the same degree of complexity that this one was, to others of the Commonwealth's attorney staff. I did that for 4 years, and under Judge Schroering, who Ed is still living with us, and it was a fine teacher. I learned a lot of law under Mr. Schroering. This was a difficult case because the person who put me in touch with Mr. Ignatow was his accountant. And oddly enough, his accountant was a fellow lector of the scriptures of mine at St. Margaret Mary. And he came to me 5 years before all of this and said, "Charlie, I have a client who needs your help." This is all of record now, so I'm not violating any confidentiality rules between lawyer and client. So I'm only saying what's in the public record. No other communications which were to be held sacred must die with me, not with my client, even though he's already gone. He murdered this lady and had gone into the rear of a house owned by a previous girlfriend, one Mary Ann Shore. He and she dug a hole, the prior girlfriend, and buried this woman after she was wrapped tightly into a small bundle. The police investigated this matter, could not find the corpus delicti, the body of the crime. Of course, the body of the crime was still buried under many feet of dirt, plastic bags, rope ties, ligatures of all kinds. I've gotten ahead of myself in that I wanted to tell you that how he got to me was through a fellow lector at St. Margaret Mary. I was to represent him with regard to a tax matter, tax violation, failure to report all income, and that sort of thing, for which he entered a plea of guilty and was sentenced to 3 months in the federal penitentiary here in Lexington. He was a salesman by trade, and he sold water purifying products. He also brought into the country from places in the Orient woven baskets, various things that could be wall hangings or whatnot. How did he explain to his employer that he wasn't going to be around the office for 3 months? Well, he simply said to his boss, I've got a lot of vacation time built up, and I've decided to sit down last night just to get in my car and go out the driveway, and wherever my car took me, that's where I'd stop or keep on going. And so don't try to call me. Now, at that time, we didn't have cell phones and other means of easy communications. So don't bother to call me. I know I won't need to call you, but don't expect me back before the end of 3 months, because I'm going to be essentially out of pocket. Well, his boss trusted him, and he accepted that explanation as to why he wouldn't be working and providing additional revenue for the company. Well, he had signed checks in a certain way that were paid to one person or another who had provided him service or purchase of goods, and he would always leave the little memo blank. So you wouldn't know until the check cleared and came back to you, because the bank always sends you back your copy of a check. If you ask them and pay the proper price for them, then it was a free thing. But then he would put in deductible business expense over that little memo blank that was given. So essentially, he admitted that he had defrauded the federal government through his income tax reporting. Well, the judge took the plea that we were able to work out with the United States attorney, because it was a federal matter. It was interstate. And once you have a matter that goes interstate, then the FBI has jurisdiction, or here, the IRS. So he pled guilty to that. He went and served his 3 months, and he went back to work. And I was the one that got him that very short sentence. Now, you're hearing about sentencing and so forth, about what's going on in the White House these days. Some of it's believable. Some of it is just corn pone, and it isn't the law. So don't be confused when you hear about what's going on in Washington these days.
Sure.
But this man clearly was guilty of that crime, and we were able to work out a very good sentence on behalf of Mr. Ignatow. So when he called me then in 1988, I believe it was, I think it was October. Pardon me a moment. He called me on a Sunday morning, and I was late getting ready for going to St. Margaret Mary to become the lector for that morning. So I picked it up kind of hastily, and I said, "Who is this?" He said, It's Mel, Charlie." I said, "Mel Ignatow, yes." Okay, I hadn't seen him for probably 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years. I think it was 5 years. And that, of course, was the IRS matter. I said, "Can I call you back? I'm right now late for church." Of course, I wasn't yet late for church, but I wanted him to know that the church was more important than whatever he was going to tell me. He said, "Well, it's important, but I don't want to go between you and the church." I said, "Thank you very much," hung up, and I called him back when I got back. And he said, "Marianne is missing." I said, "Okay, you want to tell me the rest of the story? I think you were talking about your your fiance, she had been introduced to me several months before this call came in, because my wife and I were in Nashville, Indiana, in the forest up there. I had a day off, and we took a little watercraft up there and toured the lake. And we looked up, and here was Mel Ignatow and his girlfriend, who he introduced as his fiancée. She was a beautiful girl, many years his junior. And so I said, what do you want me to do? He said, well, you know the police, you know the system, you know me, and I would tell you if I did it. Obviously, I'm honest with you because I told you that I committed the crime with regard to the IRS violation. And I said, well, of course, that's a little bit further up the scale than an IRS violation. Those things you're telling me now, you're saying she's missing. Why do you want me now? Have the police arrested you? No, but I'm sure they will. I said, well, do they have any proof? And he says, well, I don't see how they could. She just disappeared from wherever she was after she left me and drove home after our date. We had been on the river having a good time. He had a big boat, and he enjoyed that. And he had a Corvette, and they enjoyed riding around with the top down. But he told me that he wanted to talk with the police to help them understand what they had done, what degree of a relationship they had formed, where she might have been going to see a friend, those sorts of things. And I said, well, you don't need me for that. He said, yes, I'm afraid I do. After going to jail for 3 months, I find that very unpleasant. And I said, well, I would think you would. And so are they suggesting that you had something to do with her disappearance? And he says, I'm afraid that's what I'm getting from the questions they've asked. And I've told them that I wanted to see my lawyer before I went any further. And I said, well, that's always a good policy. Well, I said, why don't we get together, all of the police officers? He said, well, no, more than just the police officers, the FBI is already involved. And I said, well, that's not quite possible. The body, or rather the disappearance has to be for 24 hours or more before the jurisdiction fixes to federal jurisdiction. The Lindbergh baby law is essentially what we're talking about here, and interstate travel. So he told me that he'd like to get everybody together at my office. And I said, well, I can do that. Let me check and see if we can do it tomorrow. I'll check with my secretary, Mrs. Shea, and see what my calendar looks like. I'm suspecting that it's going to be clear tomorrow afternoon. I could be wrong. Something could have been put on by Barbara in the meantime. But I'll let you know, and I'll also let her know that if it's not quite as important as this, then we'll do this first. So I called the police officers that were from the city. I called no, there weren't any city police officers involved in this. I'm sorry. The county then was separate from the city. We did not yet have merger. And so there were two separate police departments. Called the lieutenant in charge of the investigation in the county, called the FBI and talked to the agent in charge of this case, called the Jeffersontown Police Department because she was visiting him in Jeffersontown, And so that was a point of contact where he knew that she had last been, that is he, Mr. Ignatow, and also the St. Matthews Police Department, where her car was found parked along Interstate 64. So that was the only people that I could discern would have any interest in this case and whose jurisdiction might be affected. They all agreed to see us at 2 o'clock. We took our conference room, had plenty of chairs, and they came all together, and they brought paper and tape recorder and all the things that you'd need. The whole conversation with Mel, as between all of these police officers and FBI agents, was taped, and so it became a part of the record. And this is very unusual, I gave him his Miranda rights because I kept looking at who's going to take the lead on questioning. And I said, well, look, if you guys can't figure out who's going to go first, let me, in the meantime, go ahead and get Mr. Ignatow warned and waived under the Miranda ruling. And so I told him, Mel, and we're on the tape now, you've got the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to stop this interview at any time, and you have the right to tell us if you want a break for any reason, for your comfort, restrooms, whatever. If you can't afford an attorney, obviously you do because you got me and I'm charging you. But if you decide at any time that you want another attorney, obviously you will have that right to do that. Well, that was the Miranda ruling. And so he answered all the questions appropriately. And I said, well, now, gentlemen, they were all males, who of you wants to go first? Well, at that point, Lieutenant Louis Sharber of the County Police Department began to ask questions. And his colleague, which was a lower in rank person, also participated in that line of questioning, to my memory. This was in 1988, so remember, I am much older than that, than I was at that time. So my memory might be straining a bit for this. But all questions were asked and answered. I don't believe I had to object to any of them or instruct the witness not to answer any of them. I may have, but I don't recall it. Then I was able to go back to the second round and say, is there anything else that you folks want to ask that has not yet been inquired about? And they were satisfied with that. And I said, I would like a copy of the tape from you gentlemen of what has transpired here today. And they agreed to that, part of my discovery. And they left. And Mel left, and that was it. Little did I realize that what we had done at that point in time really had won the case, because Mel chose not to take the stand in his own defense at the trial. Perfectly okay. You cannot be made to be a witness against yourself under the Fifth Amendment. And he wasn't called by the Commonwealth's attorney.
Because of that tape.
That's right, exactly. I said his testimony is of record. He has heard the tape. I will stipulate that he's heard it and knows what its content is, and that would be his testimony if he were here today. And so that tape never was very, very good in terms of the testimony that he would have given. No reason to put it on the stand. The jury was out for my closing argument was 4 hours long. Longest I've ever made in my life. And
Wow.
None since then have been of that length. As a matter of fact, we broke for lunch in the middle of my closing argument. And I think that's a first. I don't know that anybody has ever done that. But anyway, it made lunch kind of difficult going down to think about, now, what did I forget to say already and what has to be said already next time we get together. The jury was out, but, I think I'm really worried about my memory on this one, but I think they were out about 7 hours. And then I got a call. I had gone to my hotel or motel and just went into a total deep sleep. And it was the judge's clerk telling me the jury is back. And I said, okay, I'll have to shave, but I'll be right back. I'll be over there. So, but I had about a 15-mile trip to get back. There are not a lot of motels that would be good for me to stay in without some driving. And so that caused a delay of them getting in. So once we got there, Judge Johnstone called the case, and the verdict was presented by the foreman. We had moved it out of Jefferson County entirely and moved it to Kenton County, where we were able to say, this is far enough for us to go within the state so that there is not information known already through the press and the electronic media.
My grandma would have worked at that Kenton County courthouse at that time.
Was she?
Yeah.
Wow.
You see how small the state
Yeah,
is?
so I'm going to ask her about it, yeah.
We got the jury's verdict, and it was not guilty on all charges. Well, the judge said, Mr. Ignatow, you're free to leave. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for your time and patience and attention. You are called to jury duty, and that's one of the most important things a citizen may be called to do, is to sit in judgment on a fellow man.
Yeah.
The usual things that are said by a judge to a jury that had just done a hard job. Well, he was released, and then the United States attorney, who was also involved in the investigation, came to present an indictment or an information, because he was called in to give a statement before the federal grand jury. Now, a lawyer's not able to go with his client into a grand jury, whether it's federal grand jury or a state grand jury. You have to stay outside. But the client can say, hold it, I'd like to talk to my attorney before I answer this question, and then come out and talk with the attorney secretly and go on from there. And then go back in and finish, either not wanting to give further testimony on that matter, whatever that question was, and then after all questions are asked, and I should say that jurors can answer or can ask questions in the grand jury directly to the person who is before them being charged. He was said to have lied about certain things in the federal matter, lying to the grand jury and so forth.
So wait, is this all happening? Is this all happening after he's been found not guilty?
After he's found out, and that's the reason for the question of, was there double jeopardy? Because a person may not be tried twice for the same offense. Once.
So what brought him in the second time?
The lying under oath
Okay.
in the federal questioning.
So was there new evidence that
No, it was
came?
just the way it was asked in a different way about what he had said at the federal grand jury level in answer to one of the questions put to him at that setting. And it was at that point that the jury found him guilty
Of lying.
of lying. I'm trying to think, was that a jury matter or did that happen just before the judge? And I think he may have entered a plea on that. I did not have anything to do with that because I had already exited from his service. I felt that at this point, there were things that I had been told, and because of my relationship with the FBI, that I felt that I would be getting close to the line of ethics. There are very strict ethics about what you can answer or not, about what your client may have said or said outside and so forth. And I went to Judge Cleve Gamble, who was a federal magistrate handling the matter. And without hesitancy, he took my motion to be relieved of responsibility for further prosecution. I had done what I was paid to do. I did it. And I was perfectly happy to hand the matter over to whoever succeeded me. But he was sentenced on that and served time out of state in another state. And I think it was Michigan. I think they finally found a federal
But
place.
just for lying, but not for murder.
That's right. That's right. That's where the double jeopardy came in.
Right.
Charge you for the same thing.
So at the beginning of this, you said that he did commit the murder, although he lied to you and he lied to the police and the jury. So then how is it that we know that he was actually guilty? Like why was it that he was charged for perjury?
Yeah, how did they
what
say
was the
you're not
evidence or-
guilty, and then why do we know that he was guilty? What
Well, he
changed
confessed.
after? Oh,
With his other attorney, and I don't know what went on between his other attorney. Thomas Clay, very good attorney, followed me up, and he got the file. And what had happened was they searched again after I was gone, the house, and they did a much more thorough search than they had, and I think they did about 3 searches while I was his attorney in the state matter. They pulled up the carpet, which had been essentially, you see how those doors against the wall and things are behind them that we don't see?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was an air duct behind one of the doors. And they pulled it open, and they saw that the carpet was not stapled down like the rest of the house was. And it was, what I understood had happened was they intended to put in a vent over that space because it clearly was a return air duct into which the air falls after it gets cold, because you're warming the house, it goes to the top, the cold falls down. The carpet layers who came into the house, while the new purchasers of the home, his home, wanted a different color carpet. And so they went out and they had it measured and installed carpet. Well, they happened to pull up the carpet, and there was this area where the air would have fallen had it been a vent. And they had reached down into that ductwork and found the canisters of 35 millimeter film that Mr. Ignatow agrees was his evidence, or was evidence. It turned out that it was the evidence of him conducting all of the torture that went on before and the actual crime itself. And that was the end of it. I got a call because I didn't know it was being tried and had no further interest in going to the federal court. I'd put so much time in on the state court. I got a call from his son. His son was a wonderful young man who had served in the Army and was crying. My secretary, Barbara, came in to me, and I was with another client, and she says, Mr. Ricketts, can you come into the conference room now? I said, I've got a client with me, Barbara. She said, I know, and I'm so sorry, Mr. So-and-so, but this is so important that Mr. Ricketts has to do this. I understand, said the client. Client not involved in this matter. I went in and put it on speakerphone. And so Barbara, I, and my co-counsel, I believe, I'm not sure, but with a death case, you have to have 2 attorneys. That's the ABA rule, ethics rule. And you have to have 2 seasoned attorneys who have dealt with death cases before. They don't want to have to stand for another crime because of the inefficiency of counsel or the ill preparedness of counsel. You have a right to counsel under the Constitution, but the court has said, the Supreme Court has said, that means not just any counsel, but counsel who is familiar with and capable of performing in that role. Mm-hmm. And so we were there listening to the phone call, and he said, Charlie, crying, sniff, sniff, he did it. He did it. I said, what are you saying to me, Mike? He said, Dad committed the murder. I was starstruck. I did not know what to say next. I said, are you there at the courthouse where he's doing this? He said, yes, I heard it. It's on the record. And there's a little bit of activity here, as you might expect, because obviously he's going to be taken into custody and he's eventually going to be sentenced. Well, that was the first time that ever happened. I think I can't find anything in the literature that would suggest there's another like this. And that's what really got the attention of Mr. Bob Hill, who is an exquisite writer. And he wrote the book, and I think he did a very good job on it.
So, and his book, Double Jeopardy, is about this case.
It is all about this case.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, here's a Catholic kid, raised, as you've heard me tell you about my upbringing, a Boy Scout, one that's trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, brave, clean, and reverent. And I'm starstruck. I don't know what to say next, and that doesn't happen very often with a trial lawyer. He says something, anything, just make it sound like you know what you're doing. I didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. All I could do at that point, of course, was sit and wait for the next shoe to drop. There was no other shoes to drop. There was lots of conversation about what did Ricketts know. Obviously that went to bed real quick.
Was this the first or only murder case that you ever experienced?
Oh, no. I put them away. And
I figured there were a lot more, right?
Yeah, there were a lot more.
For this particular one, it was unique.
It was.
Yeah, the double jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't find that very often. You truly don't, because you got the 2 jurisdictions. They're both sovereigns. That is to say, each one is independent of the other, the state and the federal. But they each have their own set of laws. Federal law is usually found in Title 18 of the United States Code, or if you're in the military, it's the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And then the state is a separate body of law called the Penal Code. And that's written by our legislatures. So that obviously had an earth-shattering effect upon yours truly. In that I felt inadequate to say anything else about the case because I knew nothing else about the case to say. Angry about not having been told by my client, he was willing to take a polygraph test. And I spoke a moment ago about the fellow who was a former agent who had been an advisor to Archbishop McDonough. He was the polygrapher to whom he would go for the polygraph. And now he's retired from the Bureau and living in a nursing facility. And I have the good fortune of taking him from that to our meetings once a month or twice a month for the FBI Ex-Agents Society. It's a pickle that I don't think anybody could have anticipated. I had the joy of having a former law clerk be my co-counsel, and she did a wonderful job. We simply put a better case together than did the Commonwealth. We had ex-police chiefs working as investigators. We had other people that were similarly situated in other police departments doing our investigation.
Sounds like a very powerful and formative experience in your career that I think maybe shaped your understanding of the justice system and how to really be attentive to people, because there's a lot of darkness out there. There's a lot of secrets, things that people don't want to talk about, don't know how to talk about, or that they're so ashamed of or so terrified of that they will do anything.
They can't even think of it.
To hide.
They don't want to
right?
think of it.
Right. And it's that kind of darkness that has to be revealed if true justice is to be given. The Lord is the ultimate Supreme Court, right?
Absolutely.
And so even if he couldn't be retried by his human peers in this life, there's no escape of, the reality of facing our Creator and being held accountable for the things that we've done. And so I think that's the ultimate hope that we need to have in these terrible cases, these moments of suffering that people go through. Like a friend of mine last week was murdered from grade school in a road rage incident. And this guy's, it's all on footage. It's all proven. There's no doubt that he did this. But it's just like, how do you even wrestle with those types of horrible things? And especially if people get away with it, right? And yet, at the end of the day, there are many laws that our United States government has passed that aren't even moral, outside of the murder cases. And so we have to trust that ultimately...
Killing babies comes to mind.
Exactly, right? So something as horrific as that, the legalization of abortion on demand for 50 years is just unspeakable. And so things like that, ultimately there is a Lord who is merciful but also just, who will give you exactly what you want and what you deserve based on your own choices, your own habits, your own beliefs.
And we have to believe in it.
Yes.
We have to, or we will not have a justice system.
Right.
Our justice system is being tested now, as you know.
Perhaps more than ever.
Right.
More than ever. And it's going to take good lawyers with good consciences and good judges that are not swayed by political headwinds.
Sure.
To try that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that I think it's probably about all the time we have.
Well, I will put this little post note here.
All right.
Mel Ignatow died by falling on a glass table. The crime occurred on a glass coffee table. There's just too many things that are... Why does this happen? What omen did we miss? What sniff did we forget? Which area of the compass, what's setting on the compass did you not sniff out? And so you go to your deathbed with it. You really do, and you try to teach the law to those who come in and do the same thing, so that they pick up on your experiences. It gets written about. I've given speeches. I've had death threats. I've had lots of death threats, and I don't blame them, because here was a good Catholic raised girl who became the interest of his eye. And he was Jewish. He followed the Jewish and then became a Christian after all of this took place. We'll see.
We will.
I hope you heard all of this, St. Peter.
Yeah, divine justice is, yeah, beyond our comprehension, and
Right.
so, well, Papa Chuck, Charlie Ricketts,
Vincent,
thank you for joining us today.
it's been my pleasure.
Been a great gift.
It really,
Papa Chuck.
it really has. Yeah. Thank you all for joining us today on Spirit Inspire. We look forward to seeing y'all next week. So stay tuned for more great conversations.
Thank you.